Breath of the Wild didn't happen. That sounds ridiculous, but in this video I'm going to try and explain why I think that, because I'm fairly sure that most people's reaction to a claim like this will run similarly to this. What are you talking about? Breath of the Wild leans directly into the events of Tears of the Kingdom, and to that, I mean, do they? Where's the shrines? Where's the divine beasts? The guardians? Calamity Ganon's room that we fought him in was huge, and now magically it's filled with gravel. Dark Beast Ganon was absolutely massive, and yet nothing remains of the battle against him. No marks on the land, no burn marks, not even a footprint. But of course, that's just the beginning. Many believe that Tears of the Kingdom takes place a few years after Breath of the Wild, given that the world seems more built up, like it's recovering, and I don't believe that to be what happened. I think that Tears of the Kingdom happens a few years after when the initial calamity would have happened, and even this is evident. In Breath of the Wild, whenever we see Link, he only carries with him the Master Sword, and no shield. After the 100 years he spends in the Shrine of Resurrection, he does, and yet when investigating the gloom beneath Hyrule Castle, he doesn't bring a shield with him, like he hasn't learned from his mistakes, or maybe those mistakes were never made. The reason we see Link going to get the Master Sword from the Dark Forest again is because the calamity never happened, and so they returned it there to rest, because there's just no point in him having it if there is no calamity. However, this is where a little stump became apparent in my logic. I used the opening scene as a way to prove my theory, so naturally we have to take every bit of evidence from it, and right there, you see that? See that in that sentence? Yeah. So I went back to the drawing board. How can I warp this sentence to be in line with my theory? Well, it says the end of the calamity. We could interpret that as the calamity ended before it even started. It just didn't happen. They somehow found out it wouldn't happen and called it the end of the calamity. I get it stretching far, but stay with me here. Look, bats. If Zelda runs into them first, she stays behind. She wasn't scared to face Calamity Ganon after getting her powers, but she's scared to fight off some bats. Makes sense. What would make more sense is if Zelda was still yet to unlock her powers, because that moment with the Guardians just never happened. Although she does say her powers dwindled over time, and I get that, but if that's true, then why the hell did they just suddenly come back? I suppose Tear of the Kingdom, sure, but I'm just not willing to bet that tears give power. I would rather they amplify something that already exists, like we see with Ganondorf. The lack of her doing something occurs again just moments later when she sees Link's arm being burnt off, and she just looks on. And if we're still to believe it was after Breath of the Wild, she could have done something, but she doesn't. Know why? Because she hasn't unlocked her powers yet. Now we've escaped the underground, completed the Great Sky Island, you know, it's going to be addressed at one point. How has Castle Town been destroyed? Really? You're asking about that? The castle rose into the sky, and you're surprised Castle Town, which is underneath it, is ruined. That's an interesting one there, I'll be honest. Although then again, a lot more than that is destroyed. A lot of stuff much further from the castle is. But don't worry, I have an explanation for that too. There's literally chunks of land falling from the sky. Are you surprised there's things on the ground being destroyed? And by the looks of this scene, they seem to be happening about the same areas as the places that have been destroyed. But how does this all explain the disappearance of the Shiekah tech? Well, if the calamity never happened, the people of Hyrule would never have a reason to destroy it or get rid of it. And well, you know what? I could use the excuse Nintendo gave. It just decided to go, but I'm not that boring. I think the people of Hyrule re-hid the Shiekah tech. Granted, I have no idea where, and I have no evidence other than it's not here, which really is good enough evidence, but that also raises the question of, well, why didn't they get it back out after the upheaval? It has been probably about 2 weeks since the upheaval, and it probably takes way longer than that to retrieve tech like that, but fine. Say it's easy enough to do that. B. It may have hidden itself. Maybe the people of Hyrule didn't hide it, but they found out a way to tell the Shiekah tech that it just isn't needed right now, and it said, alright, bye. And also, C, look at how much Zonai tech is here. They probably got a bit distracted, or just thought, new stuff, use that instead. But anyway, it would make more sense as to why Purah has her own Shiekah tech, because it didn't just decide to turn to dust and disappear like it would if Breath of the Wild happened. And I suppose on the topic of Purah, I should probably talk about her as well. She would be about this age, 6-ish years after when the calamity would have originally initiated, so that makes sense. However, what doesn't make sense is her diaries, because she talks about being treated like a child and perfecting the aging rune. Damn, I guess this is where the theory comes to an end. Nope. We know Purah's lost her mind, she's crazy. I could literally make anything up and it's likely to be true. Here's one: she hallucinated it all. She imagined the calamity because she was so terrified about it that she imagined 100 years of random stuff, all to put into this diary entry, and only now has she begun to realise that the threat of the calamity is not apparent anymore, and her hallucinations are beginning to dwindle. But she still believes that the calamity has happened and passed. This theory could also be used to explain why only a handful of people know who Link is, considering we talked to pretty much everyone in Breath of the Wild. And this is what initially sparked the idea in my head. There is just no explanation as to why these people don't know who I am when I saved them from certain death. It just makes no sense. What would make sense, however, is if Link didn't save these people from a calamity, because there was no calamity, and therefore no reason to thank him or even know what his name is. A lot of things make this a really plausible theory, and hopefully some people can understand where I come from now. However, I did find something that is undeniable, and it proves this whole theory wrong. Horses. I kid you not, the sole reason I found this theory to be disproven is horses. In Breath of the Wild you can get horses, and when you first go to a stable in Tears of the Kingdom, the guy, whatever his name is, will tell you, hey, you already have some horses registered, and it's the ones you collect from Breath of the Wild. I put my tinfoil hat through days of pain to be disproven by horses on my Switch 2 run of the game. To say I was upset about my theory being disproven was an understatement, but to be honest, there were a lot of things that I was basically just ignoring to try and make this theory work. But this one was by far the most confirming of Breath of the Wild happening. I think this theory was always going to be disproven by the end of this video, but I did want to run for the idea for as long as I could. Like I was going to say, the reason the champions are gone is because of some random accidents. Like Daruk fell into Death Mountain, Mipha dried out, Revali got hit by a bird mid-flight and fell to his death, Urbosa was eaten by a Molduga because her lightning power didn't work for some reason, but it still wouldn't be able to explain how Sidon grew up so fast. Yunobu was a descendant of a guy who was alive at the same time as him, and Riju was also a descendant of someone who was alive at the same time as them. You could argue a lot of these points, but it's really hard, and I think it was a stretch with the part about Purah, but I still tried it, and yet it's probably safe to assume that a lot of you thought that I was in fact crazy, and I assure you that if you try to argue any of these points, you'd probably get the same reaction. In the end, do I believe this theory? When I first thought of it, yeah. I began to snowball into all kinds of ways to justify this, but eventually I realised it's just not possible to make this make sense, and as much as I wanted to believe, the horses just made it impossible. Unless you argue that the horses were those that you collected in that time period between when the calamity was supposed to happen and when the upheaval began, and it just so happens that you get the same combination of exactly the same coloured horses with the exact same names. Yeah, that's just not happening.